If we are to develop any sort of virtue whatsoever, we must be willing to learn from the world, and that ultimately comes within us through the virtue of humility. Now, there are two manners by which principally we learn and develop ourselves. The first one is through actions within the world, and the second is contemplations of things. For example, fasting regularly would allow us to control our appetite better so that we can lose weight and also eat less on the other days. A good example of contemplation, however, would be something like reading a proverb somewhere and thinking about it perhaps for 10 minutes and seeing what we can gain from that and how that should influence our behaviour within the world, such that we may be better people. However, in order to even learn from these at all, be that fasting or be that through reading proverbs and such and gaining wisdom from them, we have to actually believe within ourselves that we need this instruction and we need to develop in wisdom of the world and that we do not have that already. In short, we need to admit that we know nothing and that we are flawed fundamentally in a way that while we can overcome this, we are ultimately laden with that problem and we need to solve it. And this is essentially the crux of humility. Perhaps a more concise definition of humility, however, comes from what it is not. Humility is not cowardice, because to be cowardly is just to be weak and to underestimate yourself and who you are. It's also not arrogance, because that's an overestimate of yourself. But fundamentally, as I've just said, humility is to submit and learn from things which are greater than you in any respect at all, even in the sense of their own humility. And there will always be people who are better than you at something, and everybody in the world is better than you at something. This needs to be acknowledged so that we may be truly humble. For example, you may want to become a bodybuilder, and so when you enter the gym, you go and talk to perhaps the biggest guy there, the guy who can push the largest amount over his head in overhead press, 5x5 or something like that. And you ask him, well, how did you get to this level? And some people will tell you to do the exact opposite of what he says, but you will often get an answer something along the lines of, I worked hard at it. And so learn from that and work hard at it, because the guy is clearly better at working hard at his overhead press than you, and you want to be of that level of skill, so you need to replicate that in order to reach that level. And the great thing about this principle of humility is that it's absolutely universal and applies to absolutely everything. In Christian writers, particularly in St. Benedict's rule, when he speaks of humility, he speaks of levels in relation to how we adhere to the Ten Commandments and how we live our lives in accordance with the teachings of Christ. But at the same time, it's also applicable to almost anything. For example, a lot of people ask me how to get as literate as I am, and frankly, I don't consider myself that literate. But what I always tell people to do is to go and find books that have existed for quite a while and listen through them at the very least, and if you like them enough, go and read through them again on paper, because that's what works for me. However, regardless of any of that, I think the most important thing that people need to learn to do is that they need the humility to submit to the natural moral law. This is something that is necessary in order that societies run at all, regardless of if they're Christian or not. They need to submit to that and look into what that actually is. Not only is it great for your internal disposition to follow the natural law, which is what this channel largely teaches, but also it's a collection of socially positive behaviours that will make you more successful in the outside world as well. So I think that the most important thing that we can do is submit to this. Finally, and aside from all of the learning and such, humility is an incredibly effective virtue, because if people know that you are genuinely humble, they will be more merciful towards you. If you get yourself in a pickle, say with a couple of women or something like that, if you are humble, then people will be merciful towards you and you won't be utterly crushed by something like that. Whereas if you're arrogant, you will suffer the truly negative consequences of those actions, but also you won't learn from it, and so you're doomed to repeat this over and over again ad infinitum. So if you've been ignoring your level of pride or humility in this life, which many of us do, it's something that we all have to actively pay attention to. Now is probably a time to start paying attention to that and fighting against that pride in order to bring humility in its place and all of the sweet gifts that it offers. Thank you very much for watching. A very big thank you to those on the list here. These are subscribers to the Renaissance Man program who get audiobooks and controversial videos every week for $5 a month. There's already quite a lot of content there, so if you check it out in the description, you won't be missing out. Thank you.